A speculative attack destroyed a region's economic miracle in a single morning. It forced Asia's proudest nations to surrender to a foreign fund. The disaster began with a simple sell order. July 2, 1997. Headquarters of the Bank of Thailand in Bangkok. Traders stared at flickering screens in silence. For 13 years, the government had pegged its currency to the US dollar. But the vaults were literally empty. After burning billions defending the baht against hedge funds, authorities made a desperate call: they cut the anchor loose. That same day, the Thai baht crashed 15%. Welcome to Plexo. The baht's fall wasn't an isolated event. It triggered the fastest financial panic of the late 20th century. For the previous decade, the so-called Asian tigers had grown at a breakneck pace. Western banks, dazzled by growth rates above 8%, had flooded the region with cheap dollars. Local companies borrowed in foreign currency to build luxury skyscrapers and massive factories. When the Thai currency collapsed, the illusion of endless prosperity vanished overnight. Suddenly, corporate debts doubled in local currency. Panic spread like a financial virus across borders. Foreign investors reversed capital flows by $105 billion in just months. Net inflows of $93 billion turned into net outflows of $12 billion. On the streets of Bangkok's financial district, concrete skeletons of abandoned skyscrapers dominated the skyline, like giant tombstones. What took 13 years to build took 13 hours to start crumbling. The collapse quickly crossed the South China Sea and hit Indonesia with devastating force. The Indonesian rupiah entered free fall. The country couldn't pay its foreign debts. With no viable alternatives, President Suharto had to beg the IMF for help. And the IMF didn't give away free money. It demanded brutal cuts, suffocating interest rates, and an end to state subsidies. January 15, 1998. Presidential residence in Jakarta. Michel Camdesis, IMF managing director, stood in a dark suit with a stern look, arms crossed, like a teacher punishing a student. In front of him, the elderly President Suharto signed a $43 billion bailout agreement. That photo went around the world. It became the ultimate symbol of Asian humiliation. The leader who had ruled with an iron fist for 32 years bowed his head before an international bureaucrat. The IMF's conditions acted like gasoline on a fire. By cutting fuel and food subsidies, prices skyrocketed overnight. Inflation devoured the savings of millions of families, pushing them into absolute misery. On the streets of Jakarta, angry mobs looted supermarkets and shopping malls, leaving behind shattered glass and charred shelves. This economic recipe, designed to restore foreign investor confidence, ended up destroying the country's social fabric. The crisis was no longer just financial. It was a humanitarian emergency, with a name and a face. And the IMF had both. Financial panic didn't respect hierarchies. In November 1997, the economic typhoon hit South Korea, the world's 11th largest economy. For decades, giant industrial conglomerates known as chaebols had driven the country's growth, financing their global expansion with mountains of short-term debt. When foreign banks shut off the credit spigot, the corporate structure collapsed in weeks. The South Korean won lost nearly half its value in just a few weeks. The central bank's foreign exchange reserves evaporated, falling to critical levels. To avoid national bankruptcy, Seoul asked the IMF for a historic bailout package of $58 billion. In return, the country had to accept draconian conditions that paralyzed its productive fabric. Interest rates shot above 30%, suffocating small and medium-sized businesses. The consequences for the real economy were devastating. Hundreds of thousands of workers lost their jobs overnight. In Seoul's financial district, endless lines of gray-suited executives queued outside unemployment offices, holding folders with useless resumes under the winter snow. That image reflected the collapse of a generation that believed its future was secure. Factories shut down their machines, and the pride of a nation built on hard work was trampled. Local newspapers dubbed the IMF intervention the day of national shame and compared it to a foreign occupation. They weren't wrong about the tone, but they were wrong to think the story ended there. Faced with the humiliation of foreign debt, the South Korean people didn't surrender to despair. In January 1998, major banks and TV networks launched a national campaign to collect gold and save the country from bankruptcy. What started as a symbolic initiative turned into an unprecedented patriotic movement in modern economic history. Over 3 million citizens flocked to collection points. Elderly women handed over their wedding rings. Athletes donated their medals. Entire families deposited heirloom treasures in clear plastic boxes. The lines wrapped around blocks in bitter cold. In just 2 months, the country gathered 227 metric tons of gold, valued at over $2 billion. This national treasure was melted into bars and sent directly to the IMF's vaults to pay down the debt. Although that capital injection represented only a fraction of the total bailout, its psychological impact was incalculable. The campaign demonstrated an indestructible social cohesion, sending a clear message to international markets: South Korea was willing to sacrifice its personal wealth to regain its financial sovereignty. Thanks to this collective effort and painful structural reforms, the South Korean economy stabilized much faster than Western experts had predicted. The miracle on the Han River, which seemed doomed to disappear, began to rise from its own ashes, forged literally in the gold of its people. The question was whether the rest of the continent would draw the same conclusion. The 1997 Asian crisis left deep scars. It shifted the balance of global economic power. Over the years, even the fiercest defenders of the International Monetary Fund admitted that extreme austerity policies had been a disastrous miscalculation. Applying the same medicine to economies with radically different problems only made the disease worse. It plunged millions into poverty and triggered massive bankruptcies that could have been avoided. But Asian nations learned a lesson they didn't need to repeat. They decided they would never again depend on Washington's conditional charity. To guarantee their independence, they began accumulating foreign exchange reserves on an unprecedented scale. Today, Asia's central banks control trillions of dollars, building a financial fortress that no international fund can breach with a simple bailout form. Every stored ingot is a direct response to the image of Suharto signing with his head bowed. The trauma of 1997 transformed vulnerable tigers into resilient powers. Institutions like the IMF lost their aura of infallibility, facing deep questions about their role in modern crises. Today, emerging countries look to their own resources and regional alliances before accepting external bailouts. The post-war financial architecture is no longer an unchallenged Western monopoly. The 1997 bailout didn't save Asia from collapse. It taught them that the only way to never kneel again was to build a fortress so tall that even the IMF couldn't see over its walls.